Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to our November Training Tuesday event for OU Campus. Today's topic is table transformations. We're going to be going over how table transformations work, how we build them, and show you how to make a simple one yourself. During this presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as the session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online by clicking on the Q&A tab located in the top right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. Make sure it's the Q&A tab and not chat so that we have your email address in case your question warrants a follow-up reply. Simply type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen and send. We will attempt to address your questions during the presentation. After the formal presentation has ended, we will review and answer all remaining questions. Your presenter today is Brandon Scheirman, Software Trainer at OmniUpdate. Brandon, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Erica. Looking forward to talking about table transformations with you guys today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We're going to start off with just some PowerPoints real quick to discuss what a table transformation is, kind of the steps to create one, and then we'll launch into, as Erica said, making an example. So let me just share everything here, get it all set up. Alrighty, so our agenda for today. We're going to just really quickly talk about snippets in general, just to kind of set the foundation. As you probably know, table transformations are actually just a section or a smaller step within overall what snippets are in the system. So we'll kind of understand like what a snippet is and how table transformations are unique compared to other snippets. We'll talk about the building blocks that you need to create a table transformation. I'll discuss the steps that you would take and kind of the order in which you would go in order to make your own table transformations. And then most of our time will be spent walking through the steps of creating one by ourselves here. So just as a quick heads up, table transformations kind of by their nature require a little bit of work in source code. So today we will be diving into some XML, some XSL, HTML, and CSS a little bit as well. So just as an FYI for you guys, we will be working in code and the source editor today. And if you're working on the table transformations in your own environment, you would be doing the same. So first of all, just a quick refresher about snippets. So snippets, if you're not familiar, are a way to essentially repeat the same structure of content across multiple pages in your site, but you still want to make sure that the content inside of that structure is still unique to the page that you're placing it on. So I always like to use the example of you have some sort of design element, and you want to make sure that that design element looks the same across all of your different sites, across all your different pages, but the design element itself, whatever you're putting inside of that design element, whether that's like an image with a caption underneath it, or whether it's like an accordion or anything along those lines, all of that stuff would be contained as a snippet, so you can have a consistent look and feel, but you can still make sure that your content is unique for whatever you're working on. So that's what a snippet is mainly meant to do. Creating a snippet is a two-part process. You have the idea that you're going to build or upload the snippet file into OU Campus first. Typically, there's a folder in your _resources folder that contains all of those snippets. And then once you've done the upload or the building process, then you're going to go into the OU Campus interface and actually instruct the CMS to look at that file and actually treat it as a snippet. So you can't really have one without the other. If you upload the file into the system but you don't tell OU Campus to treat it as a snippet, it's not going to show up in your snippets menu when you're trying to insert it onto a page. And also vice versa, if you don't build the snippet, there's nothing for OU Campus to treat as a snippet. So you got to have both of those things. And then in general, there's two types of snippets that exist kind of within the realm of OU Campus or what people use. You have a basic snippet, which is essentially just a chunk of pre-written HTML that you want to just drop onto a page and then edit freely once it's been dropped on the page. And there's no advanced code that's needed there. You're literally just writing HTML, telling OU Campus to drop that HTML onto a page whenever you want it to, and then you can edit that HTML once it's on the page. So that's almost just kind of a way to save a step if you know you're going to be using kind of the same thing many times over, and you just want to, pre-write it out so you're not building it from scratch every time. That's an easy way to do it. But then there's also the other type of snippet called a table transformation, which is kind of the beginning part's the same. It's a chunk of HTML that you're placing on your page when you're in a WYSIWYG editor, but where it comes to the next portion is that chunk of HTML gets transformed into a more complex design with the help of an additional code component. And that's what we're going to focus on today. What are these table transformations, and kind of what are those additional steps that we need to take? So from table transformations, I like to use them as a helpful way to make more complex blocks of content more easily editable for your users inside of a WYSIWYG editor. Going back to the idea of an image caption or something like that, or an image with a caption underneath it, if a user was trying to build that from scratch, it might be difficult for them to understand, what kind of padding that image needs to have surrounding it, the font size and styling of the caption underneath it, and also making sure that everything that you're doing is still responsive and all that with regards to the rest of your site. So if a user was trying to go and build that from scratch inside of a WYSIWYG editor, it may be more difficult for that person to do. So what we can do as making a table transformation is we split out all of the stuff that's difficult for them to make inside of the WYSIWYG, and we just prompt them for the only information they need to provide. In that example, it would be, what's your image? And then what do you want the caption to say? And then the code component will take those two pieces of data and bring them into a more complex styling that the user itself doesn't need to worry about because it's being taken care of kind of behind the scenes. So that's kind of what the utility of a table transformation is, and it's likely that everyone here on this call has probably played around with some snippets or some table transformations in your own site, because basically every customer that we have at least has a couple of them. So you're probably even using them even if you don't necessarily fully understand how they work. Well, our goal today is hopefully to make it so you understand a little bit more how they work. So in this example, you could have, when you're inside of the WYSIWYG editor, you could have a very simplified table layout, and that's where you're just providing that specific content that you, the editor, need to provide. And it could look something like this in this example. But then when you go to your published page, or in the page preview, it's going to look like the actual output you want it to be at the end of the day. So this is what a table transformation lets us do. What we see in the WYSIWYG editor is not necessarily all that we're going to see on the page preview. The page preview is going to have a more complex output. So how do we get from the left side over to the right side? How do we go from the table to the final output? Table transformations are using XSL, just like most everything else inside of OU Campus, in order to take a certain piece of content and transform it into some other output. That's really what XSL is meant to do, is to take data, manipulate it around, and give you a different structure on the other end of the pipe, so to speak. So that's the code component that we mentioned earlier. So what essentially is happening is that we have a chunk of HTML that we are treating as a snippet, and this is what we are dropping into the WYSIWYG editor when we click the insert snippet icon in the WYSIWYG and we dump it onto a page. And this original HTML that we see here is that table output, where the user just needs to provide the small little pieces of data that they're in charge of, and that's it. Then we have some instructions written in XSL that usually is going to live in your _resources folder that is specifically targeting that chunk of HTML that we built out in step 1 and is taking the data inside of that and transforming it into whatever we want the end result to look like. And that could be a completely different HTML structure. It could be a lot of things. Pretty much it could be whatever you wanted to, because the XSL is the ultimate arbiter for what this end result looks like. My HTML that I start with could be completely different. It could even be completely not utilized if, depending on how we have the XSL structured. Now, of course, we are going to utilize it because that's the smart way to do it. But, you know, the XSL is really kind of the linchpin for controlling what we see on our live site. So what's actually really cool about this whole process is that this is a great introduction to understanding the fundamentals of how OU Campus works for your page templates, not just these little snippets of information that you're putting on your pages, because really it's the same exact process. You have a PCF, which is kind of what your starting document is, and that's just kind of structured data. And then you have XSL that's targeting that structured data and kind of plugging it into a different output, and that different output is what you get on the live site. So you can kind of use this, if you kind of understand how to build table transformations, you've gone a long way in understanding how we build our table, how we build our templates overall inside of OU Campus. So I always like table transformations because I think that it's a nice intro to the system. So maybe, I mean, you probably already have some snippets in your site. You probably know how to use them, and that's all working great. But you might be here because you want to learn how to build another table transformation on your own. So here's the steps that I would recommend, kind of the order you go in if you wanted to build out a new table transformation. What we're actually going to do is we're going to start with our end result first, and that might sound counterintuitive, but in order for you to build a snippet in OU Campus, you got to know what you're building around. Like, what do you want your end result to be? That's going to shape the questions that you ask your users and the information they provide when they're in OU Campus. So you're going to design your end result first. So you're going to go and you're going to create your HTML structure, CSS, if there's any JavaScript or any other front-end code that you need, all of that stuff, create that on your live site and make it so that your final look and feel looks good and you have it dialed in the way that you want it to look when everything's all published and said and done. Once you've done that, then you just determine what needs to be editable by your users. So you're going to essentially answer the question of what is just design, what is, you know, my styling, what is kind of the fluff, so to speak, and what is my content? What is the stuff that I need my users to change every time they use this snippet on a page? So once you've answered that question from whatever your final result is, then you're going to kind of build the table that your users are going to edit inside of the WYSIWYG editor. You're going to take all of the things that are content and you're going to build out some sort of kind of quasi-form almost that asks the users, what kind of content do you need to provide? And the general structure for that quasi-form is going to be just an HTML table tag that's got some sort of specific class applied to it. And I'll explain why when we get into the demo. And then once you've kind of figured out what your end result is and what you're asking your users to fill out for you, you're just going to write XSL to bring those two things together. So now that you know what that content is going to look like, you've built out the table with the class applied to it, you can use the XSL to grab the information that's placed inside of that table and plug it into the design of your end result. The XSL is going to have some specific instructions to target that table and then manipulate the content. And then an optional step is that if you're a more modern implementation, if you've been implemented over the last, I'd probably say, year or so, you might have the option to add in some additional code to further help out your users understand what they're supposed to provide in that table for your snippet. So we'll be going through these 5 steps here today, and hopefully we'll be able to build 2 table transformations. We might only have time to build 1, that's totally fine. But either way, at the end of the day, whatever I build here, I'll make sure that we'll have some We'll make sure to have some training materials available for you guys to download. I'll have a zip file with just all the things that I'm going to be building here on the call. So with all of that out of the way, let's hop into OU Campus. So right off the bat, I've just got a normal page here inside of my test environment, and I'm going to be using this page to kind of test out some new elements that I want to build out. So if I go to this page in OU Campus, I've got a PCF right here, and I go into my main content region. Let's just kind of see what snippets I already have, because I got to know what I have if I want to figure out what I still need to build, right? So I'm just going to go into the snippet screen here, and you can see that I've got this accordion. So if we see what this looks like and I hit insert, we have a fairly simple table transformation that's right here. And for those who just quickly requested that I zoom in here, hopefully that's a little bit easier to see, guys. I've just got this accordion, and you can see that what I have here are basically two columns. Column 1 is what my headings are going to be, and then column 2 is what the contents inside of those headings are going to be. So this is a prime example of a table transformation. I don't have to worry about what my accordion is going to look like. All I need to do is put in some content for the accordion whose styling is already taken care of. So I'm actually not even going to edit anything right here. If I just quickly save this, we can see that there's what it's going to look like on the published page. And if I were trying to build this from scratch inside of a WYSIWYG editor with all of this functionality added into it, it'd basically be impossible. But when I'm editing, all I need to do is change my heading, hit save and exit, and you can see that it instantly updates. So, you know, there's a table transformation in action. Let's see a couple others that I have in here. Let me just get rid of this one here real quick. If I go in here, these three snippets that I see in my list are actually just simple snippets. There is no table transformation component to them. And I can see, I can know that that's the case because if I add like the centered table to the page, you can see that it just looks like a normal HTML table. I don't have any of those special headings that we saw with the accordion. So we know that this one's not a table transformation. But I have this other one here that just gives me a little two-column region. And I hit insert, and you can see that I've got kind of this extra styling up here that kind of looks like the rest of OU Campus's styling. This is something that we've also been doing more and more frequently in modern implementations where we've styled all of our table transformations in a specific way so you know that there's going to be some sort of kind of change in how they look. But basically what this table transformation lets me do is, let me just fill in some standard content here. This allows me to split up a single editable region that would normally be just a full width area into a two-column region. So here, this is an existing table transformation that I already have in my site. And if I hit publish, we can see that if I view the source of this page and I scroll down here, essentially what I've created is a responsive grid structure. Nothing really too out of the ordinary relative to anything that you would want to make in a modern website, but you can see that basically this table transformation is creating you know, a row, and then it's giving me two columns that are both equally wide on the more desktop view, but then they're going to stack vertically on top of one another in a mobile view. So maybe one thing that I want to create is I don't want to have a two-column layout. I want to create a three-column layout. So, you know, looking through my list inside of OU Campus, I don't have, well, let me just get there again. I don't have a three-column snippet inside my site just yet. In light of that, let's go ahead and build that. So first thing we're going to do is we need to build out our final HTML. Before we get there, we have a couple questions that have hopped in, so I'm going to answer those real quick. Oh, Brian's got a great question regarding the accordion snippet. So he was asking, would it be possible for a user to add or remove rows from an accordion snippet? I'll quickly answer that with a yes. So here, let me show you really quickly. This is kind of the beauty of table transformations. As long as your XSL is set up to handle it, you can do things like add or remove rows from an accordion. So if I go here, the only thing I need to do is just right-click and then insert row, and now I have some content, just like that. So let me just quickly show you. There's heading 4. So yes, this table transformation is set up to handle, of course, more than just 3 rows. And then we have another question from Raid, and he's asking, how can you implement an accordion nested table without duplicating it with applying multiple apply templates? That's a question that might be more easily answered with regards to kind of your specific implementation. In our case, in this example, I think that basically every accordion is being given a unique ID as soon as it's placed on the page, I think using some JavaScript. I didn't actually build the front-end design for that accordion example, so I'm not quite sure, but I think that answer would partially just depend on how the accordion is structured for your specific instance. Anyways, so going back to our idea of making a 3-column snippet, our first example, or our first idea is we want to create what our end result is going to be, what our final HTML needs to look like. So what I'm going to do is really quickly save the page and publish it again. Now that I've published this, I can just go over to my published page. And what I'm going to really quickly do, you don't have to necessarily do it in this way. I just like to kind of grab the source of my fully published page. And I'm just going to make a new document inside of OU Campus so I can use OU Campus's source editor to modify my HTML within an easy-to-edit environment. And actually, I've already created one right here. And this is literally just the HTML source of the page that I published before. I'm just going to paste it here once more. And if I scroll up a little bit, and I'm going to really quickly zoom out the browser to something a little smaller, but then I'll just keep the text a little more zoomed, is we can see that here is my main editable region. We saw that before. It's right over here, same thing. So you can see that there's my div with the 2 equally sized columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of this. And what I want to do is I want to create my actual end result. And I want 3 columns. So instead of 2 columns, I'm just going to write out div class equals, and you know what? Before I do that, I want to make sure I remember the format for this, because this is a foundation site. So, if you guys aren't familiar with the 12-column grid, we're basically just need to make sure whatever follows the dash, depending on how many columns we have, the numbers of all of those columns need to add up to 12 at max when you want them to be stacked side by side. So if I take 12 and divide it by 3 to get 3 equal columns, I'm going to want 4. So instead of these being large 6, it's going to be large 4. I'll change this one to large 4, and then I just need to create another one of these. And then if I want, I can, maybe get rid of some of this content, but I want to have some pre-filled content in here to just make that process a little easier to see my end result. So now what I've done is I've created an HTML structure that gives me 3 equally sized columns all right next to each other. And if I hit save, I'll go back to the preview to make sure that that actually works. So if I hit save, we can see that now I have 3 columns And since this is, kind of the end result page, we know that this will work successfully. This is what my end result is. The CSS that has been, that's written for my site already takes this into account, so I don't need to provide any additional CSS or anything along those lines. All I needed to do was change the div classes. So step 1 is done. I have created my final HTML. Step 2 is I need to figure out what part of that HTML is structure and what part of that HTML is, content. What part is design, what part is content. Sorry, not structure. So really, I can just figure that out pretty simply. All I need to do is provide what the content is for each one of my 3 columns. That's what my users need to provide. They don't need to necessarily answer the question of how wide each column is. They don't need to know any of those. They don't need to know what any of these other examples are. They just need to put content in each one of the columns. So now I know internally that that's what I need to create in order to provide my users the capability to do that. So we're going to transition into step 3, which is building out what my users will see when they fill out a snippet. Quick question while I transition over there from Brendan. He was asking, are there samples available of these table transformation snippets in the default Galena University setup? Yes, so we recently just added in the accordion and 2-column table transformations into our sandbox environment fairly recently. So if you've had a Galena University environment, like some sort of sandbox environment, for quite a long time, you probably don't have them. But if you're always interested in getting a newer sandbox for whatever reason, even if you've been an existing customer, you can email us at support@omniupdate.com. Oh, Brendan just got a sandbox this week. Well, in that case, then yes, you probably do, because we added it about a month ago. So, yep, if you got a sandbox just last week, then yeah, you should be good to go. So you'll be able to see the table transformations that we started with. Of course, you won't have the 3-column one that I'm about to build. Okay, so yes, we need to build out what my users are going to now fill out when they're filling out the snippet. So the way we're going to go to create that is we're going to go to the folder that contains all of our other snippets. And that's going to be located for me and for most of you in _resources, and then there's going to be an actual folder called snippets. And if you want, you might have some extra folders in here, but maybe I've got this one right here. So here's where my snippets live. They're literally just HTML files. It is just a chunk of HTML. Let's look at one of them to get an idea of what we're going to create. If I go to the source of my 2-column snippet, this is what it looks like right here. It is a table with a specific class applied to it, and then you just have built out an HTML table. So what we're going to do is build something very similar to this, but instead of just asking them to provide data for column 1 and column 2, we're going to ask them to provide data for columns 1, 2, and 3. So it actually might even be faster for me to just copy this one, because it's very similar to what I do want to create. I could make it from scratch, but for the interest of time, I'm going to take this 2-column, and I'm just going to copy it. Give it another name. And now we're going to go ahead and edit it. So I can go into 3columns.html. I'll get shown the WYSIWYG editor view at first. We don't want to hop into the WYSIWYG editor or modify it in the WYSIWYG. So we're just going to hop over to the source. First thing we're going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and change some of this information. So my table is going to have a caption, which is going to be the heading right up at the top. I'll call that 3 columns instead. And then I just basically need to add another column into the table itself. So I'll just maybe copy this. call it column 3. And then down inside the table body, I want to create another TD right here, which is going to also give me another column inside of the T body, the table body. So column 3 here. If I hit save, just to kind of see what that looks like, pretty simple. You can see that this has no inherent styling associated with it right now. It is just plain old HTML. If I go to edit, I can see that, yep, there it is. It looks the way that it should. And if I wanted to, I could actually try to place this on a page right now. And, let's actually go ahead and do that just so we can kind of see how this will evolve over time. So going back to just the main idea of how snippets work, we have created the HTML portion, which is step 1. Step 2 is I need to tell OU Campus to actually treat this file as a snippet. So let's do that really quick. So I'm going to go into...
before you go any further, I have a couple questions that got sent in to me.
Okay.
Before I get to these, I just want to remind people, if you are using chat, make sure you look and see who you're sending the question to. If you send it to host, then I see it and Brandon will not. So make sure you pick presenter if you want Brandon to see your question. But I have a few different questions here. One is from Angela French. How do you make a plain HTML page? And then also again from Angela, what is the call group attribute for? And I see that Morgan has also sent in their question via Q&A.
Yeah, I saw Morgan's there.
Yeah. Okay.
So to Angela's first question, how do you make just a simple HTML file? There's a couple different ways that you could do it. One is kind of a workaround. Another one, you might have a template that actually lets you do that. So in our sandbox environment, I actually have a template that creates a new blank file. So what I did this time is I just copied a file, but I could have hypothetically gone here and said new. And then many modern implementations who have been implemented within the last, probably once again, about the last year or so, will have usually a file that just says new file. And this is going to create literally a blank file. You can give it whatever file name and whatever file extension you want. This will literally just create whatever blank thing you want it to be. So I could do something like this, something.html, and I click create, and it gives me literally a blank file. There's nothing inside of it. It's just an open canvas for you guys. Angela, you may have been implemented before we did that for all customers. So for you or for anyone else who has been a customer for a long time and doesn't have that template, you can also go to literally any file that you want. So, I'll just use this as another example. And then when you're in the source code editor, you can click Save As. And when you click Save As, it's going to allow you to essentially create a new file name. And from here, you would do the same thing as I did before. You would just go in here and give it a file name and then whatever extension you want. In your case, maybe you want HTML. And then you'll hit Save. And then you can just go in here and just delete all this content out. So if you don't have a template that just makes a new blank file for you, this is another way to do it. But as a quick note, it's pretty, if you want, I can actually send everybody the files that you would need to put into your templates folder in order to create that template, the blank file one, because it's really, really very simple. So why don't I do that? I'll just put that in with the zip file for these Training Tuesday resources. So if you don't have that template, you can just put that into your system and go from there. So there's your first question. And then, Angela, I think your second question, can you read that one back for me again, Erica? Oh, okay. Oh, yes, call group. Thank you, Angela. So the call group is basically it's just another way that you can provide some information about the table to target specific columns of data. It's a little bit nuanced. It's something that I'm not as familiar with. Our professional services team is a little probably more familiar with it, but when we get kind of to the end of today, we have some CSS that's actually targeting this portion of the table to provide some helper text to our users. So that's why we're using it in our table transformations. But if you would like some more details, you can email our support team, and I'm sure they'd probably be able to give you a little bit more information than I'm able to right here on the call. So going back to one other question for Morgan. Morgan's question was, could you embed options like a drop-down menu or radio buttons inside of a snippet so it can be customized further by the user? For example, could you have a list of tags for each accordion item that the user checks or selects? That's a great question, Morgan. Generally speaking, that's something that we don't do very often, but I believe that I've heard stories of customers actually building their own table transformations that do have drop-down menus. It's a little harder to achieve because you're basically putting a drop-down element inside of an editable region, and you're in the editor view. So I believe that you have to kind of do some finagling to get it to work, but I believe it is possible. It just might require a little bit of extra work. Some other small questions that have come in. Raid asked, can we use the 3-column snippet multiple times in a page? Yes, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to use this example multiple times in a page, because you're really just using the same div structure and just putting it in more, different rows, essentially. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem to do that. Aaron had another question of, can you nest table transformations? For example, tabs inside of tabs or an accordion inside of a column or something like that. Generally, the answer is typically yes, but it ultimately always just depends on what the HTML structure of the table transformation is giving you on the published page. So maybe. Most of the time, if it's a pretty generic HTML structure, the answer is yes, but there may be certain table transformations that, due to some JavaScript that's working in conjunction with it or styling or something like that, certain table transformations may not be able to nest inside of other certain ones. So it kind of comes just to whatever the design is and whatever we're ultimately creating. But generally speaking, the answer is yes. One other quick question that came in earlier that I didn't answer yet came from Dan. Dan was asking if there's any existing software editor that could help someone build these table transformations easier. Really, you can use any software editor or any text editor that you want to build the components of a table transformation. In terms of there being like a specialized tool to build a table transformation, not really. Table transformations can be so varied and they're so unique that it's hard to, have a solution that, does it just specifically that for you. Generally speaking, it's just a matter of, building your first result and then creating the snippets and modifying the XSL. Okay. So thank you for all of your questions, guys. I really appreciate how everybody's so excited in all this. But let's get back to our example here. So just to recap what I've done here is I have, first of all, I'm actually going to get rid of this class because we'll reintroduce it later on. But I have essentially a table that I've built in OU Campus that is asking users to put in data inside of 3 different columns. I need to go ahead and take this file that I've created, and I need to tell OU Campus to treat it as a snippet so I can actually place it on a page. So I'm going to go into Content Snippets. I'm going to go into my generic category. I'm going to click New right here to create a new snippet. So I'm just going to say 3 columns. And then I get to choose the file that's going to be associated. And I'm just going to choose the file that I just created. So I'm going to go _resources and snippets right in here. And I'm going to choose 3columns.html. And if I wanted to, I could provide a description. Okay, so we have now created this as a snippet in OU Campus. So I can put this on a page if I want to. So let's test out what it looks like when I put this on a page right at this moment. So let me get rid of that something.html. Okay. So let me go back to my little test page. Go into this, get rid of my 2-column example. Actually, no, I'm going to keep my 2-column example so we can see, kind of compare and contrast. Insert snippet. I'm going to choose 3 columns. I'm going to click Insert. All right, so I have 3 columns, and it's going to prompt me for some information, but watch what happens when I hit Save and Exit. It's just generating a table for me. It's not giving me my 3-column output. It's giving me effectively the same thing that I see here. For some reason, this styling shouldn't be showing up. I was expecting it to not appear there. I'm not quite sure why that didn't show up as I was expecting, but at the end of the day, yeah, strange. At the end of the day, I have a table, and on the published page, I still just have a table. So right now we have a simple snippet, but I want to make a table transformation. So now I go back to my my 4th step in the table transformation creation process, and I need to create XSL that takes the data that I'm placing into these columns right here and puts it into the div structure that I want to give me my responsive columns. So I'm going to go ahead and, in just another tab here, I'm going to keep the source of my snippet itself open in one tab, and I'm going to go to my XSL with another tab. So for the uninitiated, all of your XSL that does everything in terms of design for your pages is going to live inside of _resources, and you probably have a folder called XSL. Now, I'm going to kind of show you what we do in modern implementations these days. We're going to go into the _shared folder, which kind of reflects any of the styling that is being applied pretty much everywhere across your site. You know, these are resources that are shared no matter what type of page you're working on, no matter where in the site you're working on. It's just everything that's used everywhere. So in _shared, modern implementations are actually going to have a separate XSL file called snippets.xsl. And this file just contains the code components for our table transformations. There's nothing else in here to kind of complicate what you're looking at. It's just going to be stuff for your table transformations. Now, older implementations may have this same information in a folder, in a file called template matches, which has some other information in here that performs some transformations upon the content that's in your WYSIWYG editor. But I'm going to go into snippets.xsl. And snippet.xsl contains little pieces of code that are going to act upon each one of the table transformations that we have gone ahead and built. Now, these are the 2 table transformations that we currently have. We have the information for our accordion right here, and we have the information for our 2-column layout right here. So if we kind of take a look at the 2-column layout, you can see that the first thing, and actually really both of these, you can see that there is an instruction right at the beginning that's called an XSL template match. Now, you know, just as a quick little basic overview of what a template match is, not just for a table transformation, but for pretty much anything. A template match is an instruction inside of the XSL that says, I'm going to go and look at the document that I've been told to look at. This is kind of the XSL. I'm going to pretend that I'm the XSL. I am the XSL, and I am being instructed to look at the document, you know, whatever page that I'm supposed to be looking at, and I'm going to look for a specific thing in that document. And whatever you define inside of match is that specific thing. Now, when I say a specific thing, I mean a specific piece of data. In our case, we're using these XSL files mostly to act upon content that we've placed inside of an editable region, which is HTML, which means my template match is going to be look for a specific tag, a specific HTML tag in like an editable region, for example. So pretty much we need to have a template match that accounts for literally everything that you could put inside of an editable region. So we have something inside of XSL that's kind of called an identity template that as a default, if it finds anything inside of an editable region, it's just going to copy it over as it stands, just to make sure that whatever you put inside of an editable region inside OU Campus makes it to your published page. And that's kind of the default behavior. However, you can write other template matches that do specific things when they find specific, that perform specific actions when they find specific things. So in this case, my to column is I'm going to look for a table tag inside of my editable region, but not just any table tag, because of course you can have lots of tables and you can even have just normal tables that aren't doing anything fancy. I'm looking for a specific table that has the class attribute of OU-2 columns. So this is how we actually know that this piece of code is going to work specifically with my to-column snippet as opposed to any of my other snippets or any of the other tables that exist inside of my editable regions overall. That's pretty much what everything in the bracket is allowing us to do. So it's not looking for any table, it's looking for the tables that specifically have the class of OU2 columns. So if I want to build out some XSL that targets my 3-column layout, I'll just go ahead and put a little comment in here to properly mark up my document. I'm going to want to do a template match that looks for a specific table. So I'll start with XSL template match. So I'm going to look for a table. If I go back to my source HTML, I'm not doing anything in the snippet itself to differentiate this table from anything else inside of my site. And that's going to be a problem because the minute that I write this XSL, it wouldn't be able to draw a distinction between this table and any other table in my site. So that's why each one of our snippets have a class applied to the HTML. So I would go in here and I could say OU-3 column. And that's going to make sure that this table is specific to what I want to do with this one, as opposed to, not just specific, I want to make sure that this table is unique. So OU-3 column is unique. I'm not going to have any CSS that does this. You know, this class is really just for the XSL. Raid had a question where he said, do we need to specify? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to in terms of what you will need to specify, Raid, but you will need to provide some sort of specific identifier in the HTML to make sure that this table transformation or this snippet is unique to any other snippets that you have in your site or any other table overall. That's why we typically preface the class with OU dash, because, you know, you're not going to probably have an existing CSS class that does anything with, you know, OU dash because it's like Omni Update. So it's just one more way for us to add, you know, kind of an easy uniqueness. So anyways, I now have a class here that says OU3 column. So inside of here, I'm going to do kind of the same thing. I'm going to say, hey, XSL, look for a table that has an attribute with the name of class. So the @ symbol in XSL means look for an attribute with the following name. So we're saying look for a table with the attribute of class. And then what do we want that class to be called? It's going to be called OU-3 columns. Okay. So now the template match has been created. The XSL knows that it needs to look for this table. Now the second step is Oh, okay, so Raid has added some clarification to his question about do we need to specify? No, you don't need to specify the OU action. So you know how, for some of you, you may be familiar that there's an OU action where you can say, XSL only do this when I'm looking at the preview or when I'm looking at the edit view or anything like that. You don't need to do that with these. You don't need to say OU action equals edit or OU action equals publish or anything like that. It will work without doing so. Or at least it should. You know, maybe your implementation is slightly unique, but generally speaking, you don't need to. So yes, XSL knows that it's looking for a table with a class of OU-3 columns, which is great. That's step one. So now, once it finds that, what is it going to do? That is kind of the next question. So once you're inside of a template match, you just need to tell XSL what to do when it actually finds the thing you told it to find. And so this is where we get to build out our final HTML result. So you'll notice that over here, when I'm looking at my to column, which is very similar to what I want to create, you can see that I'm creating a div with a class of row, and then I'm going in here and I'm creating another div inside of it, and that class is going to be called small 12, large 6 columns, which is what I want to create when I want 2 columns. So this is where my final HTML output is actually being generated. The XSL is what's actually creating it. So here's like a silly example. I could write a template match that says, hey, find a table with the class of OU3 columns. Once you find that table, here's what I want you to output. Hello world. Don't do anything with any of the data that's inside the table, just instead write out hello world. So that's how we can kind of know that the XSL, that the template match is working correctly. So we'll do that as a simple test here. So I have a table with a class of OU3 column, and I have XSL that targets that. So we just want to save both of those things, and let's just place that back on a page. So we slightly modified what our source snippet looks like, so I just want to re-add it to the page so that source snippet is updated. So inside of the WYSIWYG editor, I get my table format, and I hit save and exit, and instead, I should see something that says hello world, but instead I do not. Why is that the case? Table class OU-3 columns. Let's make sure that I've written that. Oh, I did 3 column. So here's our first test. Did we write the template match correctly? And I didn't because I called this class the wrong thing. Haha. So let's just really quickly adjust that. So the template match is looking for the correct thing. We're going to save our XSL again. And now let's just refresh the page. Now we get to see that instead of a table, now the XSL is doing some work for us, and it's printing out hello world. Okay, so we know that our XSL's template match is looking for the right thing. It found it, and it did a thing. It's not the right thing, but it did a thing. So now we're just going to tell the XSL to do the right thing. So now, instead of printing out hello world every time it finds a table with the class of OU3 column, I'm going to have it create a 3-div structure. So to save time, I'm going to take the 2-column structure that we have right up above me, and I'm going to paste that here. This is a slightly more advanced way of doing it. I'm creating a variable, and I'm calling that variable several times below. If I wanted to, I can just make this a little easier to understand and do less XSL and have it be more HTML. So I'm going to create a div class, and it's going to be small -12, large -4, basically everything that I had in my final HTML, which honestly I probably should have kept a tab of that open here. So really what I'm doing is I'm going back to my my first step one, and I am taking pretty much all of this, and I'm copying that over into the XSL. So actually, let's just do that. Let's just copy all of this and bring it over into the XSL. So now I have 3 columns written out in the appropriate way. I have a row, so if I wanted to use multiple 3-column layouts, I can stack them, all that stuff. And now, instead of having all of this filler content, actually, you know what? We'll just take this step by step. So now we're going to kind of see what this modification does. So it's still looking for 3-column, and now it's going to, instead of printing out hello world, it's going to give me a 3-div structure. So here, let's just do this and save. And let's refresh the page. Uh-oh. Oh, you know what? It doesn't understand what a non-breaking space is. Okay, so I'm going to not do that. That's a silly. Get rid of that. Okay, so my apologies for that quick little snafu there. So let's save that again. So now we're still using hello world as kind of our placeholder, but now we're at least going to get a 3-column layout. So let me go back to my test page. So here we go. Inside the WYSIWYG editor, I get 3 columns, and I have some sample text in here that says column 1, 2, 3. I save, and now instead of column 1, 2, 3, the XSL is still writing out something for me. That's still not what I want, but we can see that we have done our first part is we now have an actual 3-column layout, which is half the battle. So now for our final step, we're going to replace our actual filler text with the information that I'm actually providing in the snippet itself. So now we're going to go ahead and write a little bit more XSL that tells the XSL file to, all right, well, now you're looking at the table called OU 3-column, and for each one of these rows that I'm creating, I want to take user responses and plug it into those rows. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to perform another action in XSL called apply templates, which essentially just says grab the content at the location that I tell you to grab and bring it into the system so you can then, if there's any other actions that I need to perform, I can perform them. But if there aren't any other actions that I need to perform, it's basically just a copy. So I'm going to just copy this information over from my 3 little TDs in the original HTML, and I want to bring them into the 3 little divs that I'm building in the XSL. So XSL apply templates is going to be the action that effectively performs that copy, and the way that we tell the XSL file to grab the data from the TDs as opposed to anywhere else inside of my document is using the select attribute. And then I need to kind of do the same thing that I'm doing up here. I need to tell the XSL where inside of the table I'm going to be looking for this content that I'm copying. So the way that I do that is I pretty much just work my way through the HTML structure. So if I go back to the HTML structure, I'm already inside the table, so I don't need to tell it to look there again. It already knows it's looking there. I want to get to these TD cells. So how do I get there? First of all, I need to go through the T body. So I'm going to just write T body, and then I'm going to perform a slash, I'm just going to do a slash. The slash just means look inside of that element. So what's inside of the T body? A TR. You can kind of see this as almost like a file path, but instead it's a path of nodes inside of the document. So that's why they call it XPath. XSL path. So inside of the TRs, I need to then grab the content for my first TD. So I'm working in my first column right here, so it naturally follows that the first column of the table is where I want that data to come from. So I'm going to do a slash, and then I'm going to do TD. But then instead of just leaving it at that, because there's multiple TDs, I need to know which one to use. I'm going to do a bracket right here and say TD1. And that is kind of similar to how CSS works. It's just grabbing the first TD that OU Campus finds. So this column is going to get the data from this table cell. And then I don't want to just bring in the TD. I want to bring in the stuff that is inside of the TD, but I don't want the actual TD element itself. So I'm going to do one more slash, and I'm just going to say node parentheses like that. And effectively what this does is it just says, hey, XSL, grab everything inside of the elements that I just told you to look inside of, and just bring all of it over, regardless of what it is, whether it's text, whether it's HTML tags, whether it's, whatever. Just everything, bring it over. So, and now I'm done. I have said, look in that first table cell, grab everything inside of it, and plug it into my first column. Awesome. We just need to copy that and do it 3 more times, but instead of each time I'm grabbing from the first table cell, I'm going to grab second column from the second table cell, third column from the third table cell, and we are good to go there. One thing I also can do is just an additional safeguard. Maybe someone accidentally creates another table row, and I don't necessarily want any of those table rows to be taken into account. I can just add in a little bracket 1 right here. Oops, 1 right there, to say, hey, XSL, you're not looking at any table row. You're just looking at this first table row right here. So if a user, for whatever reason, accidentally adds another table row, or the snippet gets modified to where there's another table row in here, XSL is not going to work on that, not going to worry about it, not even going to look at it. It's just going to worry about what we define right here. So I'll just do that here. Okay, so now our XSL is modified again. Let's hit save, and now we go back to our page. So now, going back to the main content region, I've got column 1, column 2, column 3 here. When I hit save, I should see that piece of information added into each one of the respective columns. Boom, look at that. Column 1, column 2, column 3. To revisit this, let's add some more content. Look at that. It's just added. So now we have a fully functioning table transformation. So in that situation, the user can put in the information they want. The XSL is going to grab that information, plug it into my end result HTML output, and we're going to get beautifulness. And by beautifulness, I mean we're going to get what we wanted to get in the first place. And now it's easier for our users to do it just like that. Raid came in with another question with the XSL. So he's wondering, could I use XSL value of instead of apply templates here? The answer is yes, you could, but it's probably not a good idea, and let me show you why. So let's change this first column to an XSL value of. So what XSL value does, for those of you who don't know, is it just takes the text values of wherever the XSL is looking. So instead of just copying everything that lives there straight over, it's just going to give me the text of whatever lives in there. And we'll see how that changes things. So I'm back here on my page, and I have 2 paragraphs worth of content, and let's just put a bulleted list. See, now, all I'm getting is the text of it. I don't get the bulleted items. I don't get the paragraph breaks, because all of those things are additional HTML tags that live inside of that TD node. since we're doing a value of statement, we're not grabbing any of the HTML tags that exist. We're just getting the tags or the text that lives inside of it. That's also a problem if I wanted to put an image in here, because it's not going to be able to grab the image. It'll just give me the alt text of the image because the image tag itself won't be brought over into the side. So yes, you can use XSL value of or XSL copy of. It just depends on the type of table transformation you're trying to build. In this example, for a 3-column layout, you wouldn't want to do value of. You'd want to make sure you're doing, a more straight copy, like apply templates, to ensure that everything comes over appropriately. So if we change this back to apply templates, and I go back to my page preview, we can see that now I have my paragraph tags being brought through, my bulleted list is being brought through, etc. So that's effectively all you need to do to build a table transformation. You're going to build your source HTML, which is what we did when we kind of wrote our div structure at the beginning. You're going to build a little HTML table that asks the users the questions that you want to ask. And then you're going to write XSL that takes the information that you asked from your users and plugs it into the HTML that you designed at the end of the day. Now, I remember that there is a 5th optional step that I want to just speak to really quickly. So the 5th optional step is to provide just some additional code to make it even easier for your users. Notice with my 2-column layout, I have this blue helper text that's showing up above my column headers, and you'll also notice that no matter what kind of content I add in here, my columns are always equally wide. Now, if I go in here and I do that, notice that my columns aren't being spaced equally wide depending on the content that I provide in here, and there's also no helper text up above. So we can fix this with an additional CSS file that we've been bringing into modern implementations to further help out our users. And let me just show you where that lives. Like I said, if you've been implemented for a while, you may not have this capability in your site. The process by which you would, see that wouldn't look great. It looks very different in terms of, width and stuff like that. That's just not awesome. So for modern implementations, what we do is we have a CSS file, and let me show you where that's located. We're done with the XSL now, so I'll just move away from that. And we're actually done with this HTML as well. We can keep the HTML up if we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into _resources/OU. And inside of that, we've got the editor folder. And this is basically where we have any sort of things that OmniUpdate has built for you that is specifically going to show up inside of the WYSIWYG editor. Not anywhere else, just in the WYSIWYG editor. There's a file here called WYSIWYG.css. And inside of that, we have a bunch of CSS that you can see is targeting tables with a class of OU-. And then, anything past that. So this is all kind of generic information. This is all meant to be information that is the same for everybody. This is what allows us to make our table transformations look like they're part of the OU Campus interface. Let me get rid of this page too. That's what's going to give me the gradient. That's what's going to give me kind of the full width feel, the gray backgrounds. Like that's what that CSS is doing. But at the bottom of all of it, you can write specific CSS for a specific table with a class of OU- something, and you can provide some helper text. So what I can do, you can see that I've got some CSS here that targets my OU 2 columns table, and it's targeting that call group attribute, and each column inside of the call group is going to be 50% wide relative to the region that you're placing it inside of. So going back to your question earlier, Angela, this is kind of why we have the call group added to each one of our regions, is that we can make sure that each one of the columns is a specific amount wide or something like that, it prevents us from having to write in that styling into the snippet itself. So we're just using this external CSS file to kind of handle all of that. And then inside of it, we have some helper text that is showing up in different table rows or different columns to provide some of this other information. So if I wanted to, I could hop in here and kind of copy this CSS and bring it over and have it be for 3 columns. So the first thing I need to do is I need to change the class that the CSS is looking for. And I'll change it to 3-column singular. Quick little helper fun tip. For those of you who work in the source editor quite a bit, did you know that you can edit multiple lines of text at the same time? You can simply hit Control and click in multiple places, and see how I have a cursor in 3 places? And now I can do this all at once. So for those of you who use certain text editors like Notepad++ or Sublime, you might be already familiar with that, but you can do it inside the OU Campus source editor too. So now all 4 of these instructions are now targeting my new table transformation. I want to make sure that each column is equally wide at all times. So I'll make sure that each column is 33% wide. And then in here, what I can do is I can just increase this number to n+4. And what that will do is it will make sure that all three of my columns will have this little piece of helper text right up above it. So once I'm done writing this CSS, I can hit save, publish out this CSS file, and then when I pop over into OU Campus again, nothing changes on the publish page, of course, because this CSS is only working when we're inside the WYSIWYG editor. And then when I hop into the main content region, now you can see that my columns are all equally wide, and now I have some helper text that's showing up here. If I try to go in here and I try to add a 4th column, I say insert column after, oh, this content will not be added to the columns. Well, there we go, that's good to know. And then if I try to add another row in here, this content will not be added to the columns. Hey, look at that. So that's one of the really good things that's about this CSS, is that you can provide some other information to make sure that users know what they can and can't do, in addition to what they're supposed to do in the regions that you have made for them. So some other questions came about that. Some people are really excited about that. Melissa asked, if we don't have a modern implementation, how do we get these additional features? There's a couple pieces of things that you can do. Most of the stuff that I'm doing here is fairly easy to do, regardless of what, how old your implementation is. The one that's probably the more difficult one to add is this little CSS information. But even so, I was able to basically modify this test environment in order to allow it, because this test environment used to not have it, and I was able to, essentially fix it fairly easily. It's basically a matter of doing a find and replace to where every single OUC div tag that exists in your site, you've got an OUC editor tag that's inside of it that defines some additional properties for the WYSIWYG editor. You're going to basically just add this. It's a little attribute for OUC editor called CSS path, which says when I'm inside of this editable region, bring in this additional CSS style sheet when I'm working in the editor exclusively. And then you just provide the location for that WYSIWYG.css file. Most of the information in WYSIWYG.css is universal for everybody, so that's not too big of a deal to worry about. I'd be happy to, essentially bring, attach a copy of the generic information for that file. Then you just basically need to have this CSS file in existence, and that your editable regions are actually bringing it into your page. The hardest part about it is really just essentially doing a find and replace that actually finds every single one of your OUC editor tags and brings this WYSIWYG.css file in. So really still not that hard to do, but just requires a find and replace that's going to effectively touch every file inside of your site. So there's I guess an element of risk always associated when you do a find and replace that's that extensive. If you do have any questions about this, I would always recommend, emailing our support staff, and we're happy to help you out. We'd always like to help guide you in the process for your specific implementation first, rather than try to solve something that gets broken due to an incorrect find and replace. So if you do have any hesitations with it or anything like that, email our support staff at support@omniupdate.com, and we'd be happy to assist you in that method. So Brendan's got a question about the CSS file. Is the CSS file read off of the server or from within OU Campus? I believe that it's pulled from from the production server, but I actually haven't done any testing on that personally. So I mean, you could just try to have this WYSIWYG.css file only on the staging server as opposed to just on the production server and the staging server. Try that out. If OU Campus brings it in and it's not on staging and it's not on production, then there's our answer. And then related to a question that came in earlier, Luce, she asked, can we have this in our OU editor? I believe that you were probably asking about the CSS as well, Luce. So everything that I just talked about here is happening like that. Jerry had a question, can we get an updated copy of WYSIWYG.css off of the OU site? Like I said, a lot of the stuff that's inside of WYSIWYG.css is universal, so I can just send that off. I don't believe that we have a place where that's located publicly as of right now. I don't believe it's part of our public GitHub. It may be, but just as a safeguard, I can always just send off the universal portion of this WYSIWYG.css to you guys in the files that I'm going to send off at the end of today. The stuff that's not universal in WYSIWYG.css is going to be specific helper text that you are writing for your specific snippets. So, of course, that stuff isn't going to be contained with any sort of generic file I'd be able to send off. You would have to essentially write that for yourself. And another thing to note is that the WYSIWYG.css assumes that all of your snippets are tables with a class of OU-something. Otherwise, the CSS that we've written doesn't target it. So if you are one of an implementation that doesn't have WYSIWYG.css, maybe you've been a customer with us for several years, that would be the first thing that you would want to check before actually bringing that into your site and trying to use it. You'd want to make sure that your snippets are all tables with a class of OU-something applied to them. So anyways, this is something that's totally optional. You don't need it to make your table transformations work, but as some excitement has, sort of come in today, you can see that it's pretty helpful, right? Pretty useful. So it's a nice thing to have for sure. So I know that we've talked a lot about a lot of things today, and I know that there's been a lot of questions kind of interspersed throughout all of this whole process. But I want to just kind of recap what we did today. Because the steps themselves, especially when you're not having to narrate your actions, are fairly straightforward. Step one is you're going to go in whatever way you want to do it. You could do it inside of an editable region just in the source code editor. You could have a separate blank HTML file where you're doing this. But in some way, shape, or form, you could even do this outside of OU Campus if you wanted. In some way, shape, or form, you're going to create your end result output with any CSS that needs, oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. With any CSS that needs to happen, with any CSS that needs to exist, you're going to build out your end result. Then you're going to identify, okay, here are the things that I need my users to fill out to make this end result successful. You're going to build a table that looks similar to one we've built out here today that asks your users those questions that you identified. And then your third step is you're going to go into the XSL and plug and play. Figure out where the content is when inside of your HTML, write XSL that takes that content and plugs it into your end result output. And then if you want to kind of do that in steps, that's always great. You know, your first step could be just literally copying the HTML that you wrote out for your end result and putting that into the XSL first to make sure that, you know, that's working, and then deleting out your filler content and putting in your real information later on down the road. And then once you do those 3 steps, you're done. Your table transformations are working successfully. And then if you want to, you can play around with that WYSIWYG.css to provide even more helpful information to your users when they're using the new table transformation that you have built. So with that in mind, that wraps us up for what we have today. I want to say thank you for all of your great questions. I will be working on building out all of the supplementary materials, some README documents and things like that, so you guys can play around with everything that we looked at today. But I hope this has been useful. I hope that it's been enlightening, and I hope that you guys, 1, know more about how table transformations work, and 2, how you can make your own if you wanted to.
Yes, thank you everybody for attending, and all of these files and the recording of this training will be available at support.omniupdate.com. You'll be able to see it from the homepage. So all of this will be up later today, and you'll be able to read through all the files, all of that. Next month's Training Tuesday will be on December 12th. We're holding it a little earlier in the month as of this one because of the holidays. We're going to be covering the topic of custom gadgets and API. So that one's a little more developer-oriented. But look forward to that. Invites for that one should be going out in about a week or so. And if there's any last-minute questions, and if not, I'm going to wrap everything up. All right,
yep,
great.
It looks like I haven't seen any other questions myself either, so we're good.
Okay. All right, great, everybody. Thank you so much for attending, and we will see you all in about a month. Have a great rest of your day.